Microservices and monoliths might be more alike than you think. The key word is might. I'm Devin Wilson, and I'm going to tell a tale of insight, discovery, and learning of monoliths and microservices. Once upon a time, there was a monolith. There were others like it, but it didn't know too much about them. They mostly kept to themselves, and they seemed to be kind of busy. It was kind of lonely, but also kind of nice. The monolith had quite the appetite. It would grow by learning new skills, and it got bigger and bigger. It started comparing itself to the other monoliths. The other monoliths seemed to do some of the similar things that it did, and it felt like something was wrong. Then one day, the monolith met a microservice. The microservice was more lean and a little more social. It shared a lot and offered to help the monolith, and the monolith gladly accepted the help because it had grown slow and large. So the monolith started hanging out with the microservice. Now, at this point in the story, you might be thinking this is starting to sound a little bit like the plot of the movie Ice Age. There might be some parallels, so pay attention for those. One day, the microservice introduced the monolith to some of its companions. They were all so different. One would take care of the guest list, another would run errands, and yet another would handle bookkeeping. This mob of microservices seemed to get along so well together. The monolith started asking these microservices some questions. How do you know what the other microservices can do? How do you know when they're done with a task? And how can you trust that they did it right? And the microservices started talking about these things called contracts that they had agreed to. They said, if you provide X, I will give you Y. The monolith pondered this. It seemed like these contracts helped the microservices coordinate. The monolith thought about it more. It already knew what tasks it had that it could do, and it knew when it was done with a task. Maybe it had its own internal contracts, and maybe it could interact more with others by sharing these contracts. In excitement, the monolith wondered what else it could learn from these microservices. It had become slow at learning new skills, and it seemed like the microservices were a little bit more efficient at learning new skills. It wondered why. And then it had an epiphany. A microservice, an individual microservice, could learn a new skill more quickly, but then it had to teach the other microservices how to use that skill. When the monolith learned a new skill, it often applied it at the same time that it learned it, but these microservices could decouple that. They seemed to decouple the learning and application. That was the main difference that it noticed. The division of responsibilities meant that the microservices had to learn to coordinate. And that overhead seemed kind of inefficient, at least for some tasks. For example, keeping the guest list and bookkeeping are kind of closely related. As the monolith thought about it more, it also had to do some coordination. Sometimes it would learn a skill but not apply it yet, or it would apply it in one way initially and then later on apply it to a different task. Sometimes it would need to develop a skill further to apply it to a new task, and it would have to make sure to not break the existing uses of that skill. Sometimes even learning a new skill would cause the monolith to regress in other skills. Surely the monolith could learn something from these microservices about reliability. But to its dismay, the microservices also suffered from regressions. It seemed like the microservices had a lot of the same problems as the monolith. After all this analysis, the monolith was tired, and it resolved to stop comparing itself to the microservices. Instead, it decided to focus on collaborating with them and doing what it does best. In the end, the monolith became a part of the tribe, distinct and yet a part of the tribe. Over time, the monolith adapted. It learned to pass off some skills to the microservices, ones that seemed simpler. And likewise, the microservices adapted to the strengths of the monolith. If there was work that was particularly hard to coordinate, they would teach the monolith to handle that work. And all the effort that the tribe applied was well balanced. At least for a short time, until one day the world froze over and the monolith and microservices stopped functioning, and they had to learn about disaster recovery. But that is a talk for another day. The end.